alongside leukemia cancer cells. In addition, this cell culture was stimulated with highly oxidizing substances and the growth factor interleukin-2, the stress proteins, exported from the cellular mix, and a repair enzyme protein were explained exclusively as indirect markers for infection of these cells by a new retrovirus. Later it was also possible to determine the synthesis of this proteins induced by pro-oxidative cellular stress in other human cells. Thus one produced the assumed new immune deficiency virus, HIV. In other words, as in the Japanese example, the new virus had never existed. However, one brought this human test proteins into contact with human sera, and it logically prompted an antigen antibody reaction, just as with other foreign preotins, though also in sera of healthy test subjects. Thus one knew that these reacting proteins stimulated in AIDS and cancer cells with all possible antibodies, also reacted in blood serum of healthy patients who were beyond suspicion of having been infected by the presumably new fatal HIV. Yet, since one also knew that most AIDS patients showed increased polyspecific antibody levels, the test reaction threshold was set at a specifically high antibody level. In this way it was seemingly proven, in a logical cycle conclusion, that only the test subjects from risk groups with more or less pronounced cellular immune deficiencies reacted positively to this anti-HIV antibody test. That is, they had to be infected with HIV according to this topsy-turvy logic. Using this manipulated AIDS test, millions of human beings were selected as assumed victims of the fatal sex and blood epidemic HIV during the past 17 years, and countless people were killed by aggressive cellular toxins based on the medical assertion that one was extending the lives of these patients. Raum plus Zeit. Did these lab tricks suffice to convince the scientific community? Kremer. No. A seemingly plausible theory was formulated, at least considering the denial of pharmaceutically contributed toxic causes. It held that the apparent virus linked the cause of AIDS to the cause of cancer. Retrovirus cancer researchers postulated from 1983 on that retroviruses were not directly settled cells transformed into cancer cells, but that the HIV retrovirus would destroy T4 immune cells, responsible for intracellular immunity resistance. The lack of immunity cell monitoring would mean that tumor cell clones that form in every organism by incidental mutation would no longer be held in check and could increase at will. Hence Kaposi's cancer would develop without substance-induced immunosuppressive agents. Thus a call was made at the First International Congress on AIDS in 1983 to carry out a series of human experiments to test this cancer theory. Meanwhile, after use of another immunosuppressive agent for organ transplant patients, cyclosporin A, not only Kaposi cancer tumors but lymph cell cancer too developed in the brain, along with solid carcinomas in a variety of organs. Raum plus Zeit. Your book documents the substances with which these planned experiments were or still are being carried out with AIDS patients and HIV positives. What were the results? Kremer. All AIDS patients were treated with the immunotoxic chemoantibiotic spectrum of all things and related substances such as long-term prophylactics against the lung fungus infection PCP. From 1987 on azithromycin, AZT, was also used against HIV, supplemented from 1989 on by AZT medication for HIV positives without symptoms. During the 1990s a complete battery of AZT-related substances plus other preparations toxic to mitochondria were prescribed as cocktail or combined therapy. Sooner or later these substances logically produced AIDS and cancer among the patients. Naturally none of those affected would have taken part in these medical experiments if they had been informed that the goal was to disable the cellular immune defense medically in order to test the immunity monitoring cancer theory. The manipulated fear of death from the fatal HIV infection made the patients and parents of newborns and children with HIV-positive test results willing to cooperate in taking unlimited AST, Spectrum, etc. Raum plus Zeit. You are the first researcher who explained the reaction mechanism of AST and Spectrum based on results of international research on nitric oxide. No. And you drew the conclusion from published clinical studies with these substances that long-term medication with AST and Spectrum is a dangerous bodily harm with fatal consequences. Kremer. AST has the identical nitrogen action profile as azathioprine. The azido group in AST blocks cell respiration in the mitochondria just as the aza group does in azathioprine, and the analogous action group in thimethoprine. The inevitable results are with very high probability AIDS, cancer, as well as nerve and muscle cell degeneration, as hundreds of clinical studies on HIV/AIDS medicine have proved beyond doubt. The published evidence is overwhelming. Raum plus Zeit. Have AIDS and cancer virus researchers been able to prove the immune surveillance theory of cancer causation with their perverse experiments on human beings? Kremer. No, since they were fixated on mutations in the DNA nucleus and viewed cancer cells as foreign bodies, they were investigating the wrong scene of the crime, nor had they solved the so-called AIDS puzzle. What they could not foresee was the fact that fundamental findings outside orthodox AIDS cancer medicine were gained from the end of the 1980s, and these have guided virus researchers' theories misled. Raum plus Zeit. Can you brief us on the results' most important findings? Kremer. All human cells are the genotype of an primeval single-celled organism settlement about 1.5 to 2 billion years ago with energy preparation not reliant on oxygen but by acquisition of energy through oxidation. The latter, called mitochondria, continue to live as cell colonies in all cells of algae, plants, fungi, animals, and human beings. Genotypes of both single-cell organisms were integrated into the nucleus. The mitochondria conserve the residual genotype for independent protein synthesis in cooperation with protein encoded within the nucleus imported into the mitochondria. The more than 1,300 mitochondria existing on average in all human cells possess collectively about 50,000 active genes, a greater number than in the nucleus. Between the mitochondria colonies, that represent 90% of the total energy in the cell's latent and active phases, and the host cells, there is also a complex import-export system operating through mitochondrial gates for protons and electron flow, ionic exchange, preparation of the universal energy carrier molecule ATP, and various metabolic products. Since ATP cannot be stored, the mitochondria, amounting to more than 1,000 times the number of our body cells, produce an unbelievable amount of ATP daily. It equals roughly the magnitude of our body weight. The mitochondrial gates, and this is the new finding, are controlled by a mixture of gases consisting of nitric oxide, NO, and peroxide anions. The latter accumulate as a product of the oxidative respiration chain in the mitochondria. No gas was verified during the mid-1980s as a basic functional gas found in almost all human cells. There is a gas-controlled alternating rhythm in the form of energy preparation between the mitochondria colony and the cells as a whole. During the late cell division phase, the early wound healing phase, and the embryonic phase, up to the moment of birth, preparation of potential energy is overwhelmingly shifted to production of non-oxidizing and fermenting ATP. This protects the genome portions of disorganized host cells that during the cell division are more sensitive to oxides and their derivatives than the mitochondrial genome portions. Depending on redox activity, this primordial genome portions express the necessary enzyme protein for alternative switching of oxidizing to non-oxidizing energy preparation. Thus our primeval cell symbiosis possesses a